Well, thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I was musing earlier that this is the first jQuery conf that I've been to in maybe 3 or 4 years now, which is a little weird because I created jQuery back in, I guess, 2005, released in 2006, and I stepped down in 2011 to start focusing on building more applications and working on education. I work at Khan Academy now, which is an educational nonprofit. Thank you. But what's exciting is one of the things I worked on during my time at jQuery, besides the code itself, was building a really awesome team of people who are really passionate about jQuery and helping developers all over the world. And now they continue to make and do awesome things like this event here, and I get to be a passive bystander, so to speak, and enjoy it with all of you. So and that's all I ever wanted, so I'm really happy. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about some of the decisions that went in the very early on in jQuery, circa, I'd say 2006 to 2009 or so, where we were making decisions about the direction of the library and how we were going to present it. And I feel like there were a lot of things that we probably could have done a lot better. I will fully admit that. But I feel like there were some things that we did really right. And as it turns out, I feel like the things that we did really right were because we were listening to our users and trying to empathize with them. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that today, and I'm so happy to be sandwiched between two amazing other speakers who are talking about this as well. So just to set a little bit of context, back during I guess I'd say about 2004 to 2009 or so, there were a lot of really popular JavaScript libraries. jQuery was just one of many. There's Dojo Toolkit, Prototype, MochiKit, all these different libraries, and they were all trying to do a relatively similar set of things. Obviously, some had more features than others, but at their heart, they're trying to make dynamic applications, trying to do DOM manipulation. But the thing is that assuming all code is equal, now that's a bit of blasphemy, because the thing is that inherently as coders, we like to believe that some code is inherently better than some other code. And I tend to disagree, which is that code that it isn't necessarily the code that is better written, although sometimes it is, but it's also that there are other things that aren't code explicitly. And it's the things that aren't code that can help to differentiate the code itself. And the interesting thing about these things that aren't code is a lot of them are user-centric, in that you're trying to connect with your user and understand them. But this is interesting, because at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, if you're making a tool for other people to use, you are your own worst enemy. All right, so people are going to not use your framework or tool almost entirely because of mistakes that you've made. Now, this is especially challenging because that kind of hurts, and that if you make a mistake in your tutorials, in your downloads, if you make bugs, and if at the end of the day you only have yourself to blame, obviously that doesn't feel very good. But this is something that we spent a lot of time on, where really what it comes down to is that you're trying to help your users overcome those hurdles that they face during the process of using the tool. And these hurdles are going to happen at every single step of the way. And ultimately, you have to put yourself in your user's shoes. You have to empathize with them and understand where they're coming from and how you can help them. Now, one little chart that I made to kind of understand the life cycle of a user. And I broke this down very crudely to first day, first month, first year. Now, this time frame could be very different based on the user. This could be first hour, first day, first week for some other people. It really depends. But ultimately, when someone is starting to use a new tool, what they're going to do, I feel, breaks down in this similar way. And that, in the very first day, they're going to be, looking at the homepage, looking at the tutorial, looking at the download, trying the tutorial, experimenting, doing these basic things. And in the first month, they're going to start to try and integrate it into their web app. They're going to look at the API docs. They're going to start asking questions in the community, all these sort of things. And I really want to focus on these first two parts, because these are the areas that we spend a lot of time working on in jQuery in particular, trying to make these better and better. Now, I feel like a lot of the advice that I'm going to give today is going to be, at least to me, it feels painfully obvious. So I hope you'll bear with me, because I feel like it really helped us in the end. Now, the thing is, what I think is interesting is that inherently that if you, as running a project, lack empathy, it's going to result in you creating a worse product in the end, something that users are less able to understand. And thus, as a result, users are going to be leaving. They aren't going to understand it, and they will want to go away and try something else, which makes a lot of sense. But at the end of the day, being unable to empathize with your users will drive them away. And I feel like that's really important. So I want to step into the first day, as I call it. So when someone first starts using the tool for the very first time, and what their experience is like. And I have a little quote here. This is an old quote from 2009 from a user. He says, "After spending less than 3 hours reading blog posts and perusing the documentation, I was able to do a lot more in a lot less time than ever before. The huge community and neatly organized jQuery plugins make me feel like a sucker for not having a jQuery for my pet project." I thought it was an amusing quote. But that's interesting, though, because there's a couple things packed in there, in that obviously this user who just started using the library, he's just starting to explore it, he's already realizing how good it is for them. Now, I like to deconstruct that experience a little bit, because packed within that is that the user came to the project and came to presumably the homepage of it, and immediately they're trying to get a few questions answered. So, they're trying to answer, like, what on earth is this thing? It's called jQuery, but what is it? What can it do for me? And then where can I go to learn more? Obviously, the design of the jQuery homepage has changed a lot over time, but this is the most current iteration. But we try to answer all those questions right on the homepage. And again, this feels very obvious, but you would be surprised, or maybe not surprised, at how many projects fail to do this very basic fact, where it's like, providing basic information about the project and what it's supposed to do. So one of the things we provide on the homepage as well are details about just showing code examples, showing code, what it does, and how it'll work in your page. And I feel like this is extremely effective, especially since then the users don't have to go digging through and looking for tutorials and all sorts of stuff before just understanding what it's going to do. Additionally, having a very quick, clear call to action and the ability to just download the code. Now, one of the things that this is something that in the past jQuery was criticized for was not having the ability to have custom downloads, the ability to choose which modules you would want to use and compose into a version of jQuery. Now, what's interesting is that actually the very first version of jQuery that I released in January 2006 had a download builder. You could pick the modules you wanted, and it would compose into a single library, and you could have, if you didn't want to have Ajax or you didn't want to have this or that, you could have that library. But the thing is I ultimately decided not to do that and went with a unified library for a couple reasons. Because the thing is that in the end, it meant that every single person who used jQuery was going to have the same exact API no matter what. And it meant that if you were going to look at someone else's code and you wanted to try it in your thing, it was going to work. We could guarantee that it was going to work because you were going to have the same modules. Nothing was ever going to be weird about it. Additionally, we always link directly to the source, never linked to a zip file. And a lot of libraries did this. They would give you a zip file with like documentation, other stuff in it, which is very useful. I will totally admit that. However, it's one extra step preventing the user from going in and actually getting to the meat, which is the actual code that they can include in their page. One additional thing, and I'd say this is a lesser concern, is the concern around licensing, is that Some people tend to be more worried about licensing than others. And I say in the case of open source projects, it's better to err on the side of having the most open, most liberal license as possible. In the case of jQuery, we went with what's called the MIT license, and I will quote that probably very succinctly and very improperly as, leave my name on the source file. So that is essentially, other than that, I don't care what you do with it. You could rename it, you could sell it for money, I don't care, as long as my name is still there. And so that is roughly what the MIT license is. But as a result, it means that anyone at any corporation or any project, they can feel safe knowing that they can use jQuery without any hindrance. Now, one of the things we spent a lot of time on, an inordinate amount of time on, was the basic getting started tutorial. So this is beyond just the homepage, where someone would come in and right now the current one's called How jQuery Works. And this is the very most basic, okay, you include the script tag in your page, and you download the jQuery source file, and then now we're going to make something and have it be clicked. Just the very most basic things. But the thing is that we found that having this be incredibly clear and is just so important to someone getting started. If people trip up during this step, during the step of trying the intro tutorial, the likelihood that they'll ever use your library is approximately 0. Because the thing is that that's the very first experience they're going to have with the actual library. And the thing is that if I know that I, as a user, again, you're putting yourself in their shoes, if you're trying to use something for the first time and it breaks immediately, why on earth would you want to use it? And so again, we put a lot of work and a lot of time, a lot of effort into designing that getting started tutorial, so that way people could come in and just experiment, have an instant result that makes them feel good, and then they can go on from there and build something else. One of the things I'll mention here as well is that in communities, if you ever see someone, and especially if it's in a community of a project that you run, if you ever see someone asking, oh, I was just starting out, I just downloaded the thing, or I was just starting the first tutorial, and I couldn't get things to work. It was failing for me, it was breaking. That is a priority one, klaxon sounding, that is the worst possible case, worst possible bug, worse than anything else. Because again, if you're just getting one user report, that means there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of other people who are having the same exact issue. And so this is the case where you need to step up and fix these things, because you're probably losing more users than you even possibly realize. Now, one of the things that I'll emphasize, and one of the things I think we lucked out with jQuery, is that we really set out to design an extremely simple library, extremely simple API, make it as easy to use as possible. Now, one of the huge advantages of that is that it makes it really, really easy to learn, obviously. So if someone's coming in and just trying it for the first time, they can make something and have it look cool and have it be responsive or whatever immediately. And that is just so compelling. Now, and not all the libraries have that. So within the first month, so this is beyond just that first day, and so there's another quote from a user. All right, I'm now really, really into jQuery. I used to hate JavaScript. What has happened here? JavaScript people speak to me. And one of the things that we've focused on a number of things to help bring users from that initial experience up to being full members. And one of the places where we dedicated a lot of resources was into building up a community, making sure there was a strong community around jQuery to be able to handle issues in any way. So we've had a number of different ways in which people could ask questions. We obviously have we used to have a mailing list, now we have a forum, now there's GitHub, there's an IRC channel, and of course there's other resources that people go to, Stack Overflow, Twitter, blogs, wherever. Now, one of the things that's important is that very early on, and in fact, the very first person I brought onto the jQuery team, obviously besides myself, was actually Ray Bango, who is actually speaking tomorrow. He works at Microsoft now on the new Microsoft browser, And I brought him on to lead the evangelism team for jQuery, and specifically what his goal was to make sure that if anyone was having a problem with jQuery anywhere on the internet, to find them and help them, or at least turn their issue into a bug in our bug tracker. So then that way we were aware of everything that was going on to the best of our ability. Now this was a lot of work. And there's a reason why I brought him on first, was because we really wanted to create the best experience possible. And ultimately, it's like we wanted to be able to treat every user as a potential future contributor. These are people who could step up someday and contribute back to jQuery. So just as an example here, this is a thread back from early March 2006. So jQuery had been out for like a month at this point. And we have here are Mike Alsop and Michael Geary, and they were asking questions and submitting bugs and stuff, and I was there chatting with them and helping answer their issues. And both of these users ended up becoming longtime contributors, contributing to the project for many, many years into the future. And then we did things, and this is part of Ray's initial efforts, were like tracking Twitter, looking for people who were struggling, having problems, asking questions, and just triaging them and helping them and figuring out what their issues are. Now, additionally, it's just in that initial period, I remember for the first couple of years, I was answering questions, answering emails almost nonstop. And so there's a case here. And because I never really knew, I didn't know anything about my users, I wanted to be able to help all of them. So this is a case here where someone was writing in an issue, it says jQuery offset issue in Firefox 3 for Mac, on Mac. And I was answering questions, and I was helping them along. And then finally, in the last message of the email thread, and I find out that this person actually works at Amazon, and that they were actually now moving Amazon.com over to using jQuery. I'm like, well, you really buried the lead there. You could have told me that in the first email, and I would have been happy to, thank goodness I responded and helped them, because otherwise, if I didn't, maybe they would have been like, oh, jQuery is so flaky and we'll go elsewhere. I don't know. But thankfully I did, and Amazon uses jQuery now, so which is fantastic. But this is the sort of thing, I feel like, this is the case where you're paying attention to your users and helping them every step of the way can be so important. And of course, as well, you need to be able to follow up with your large users. So we actually kept track of all the major projects and all the major sites that use jQuery, and we constantly checked up on them to make sure that they were having a good experience. That if they were having any issues, that we knew about them, that we were fixing them, so then that way they wouldn't ever get grumpy. We put a lot of work into this. And again, none of this is explicitly code necessarily, in that obviously if we're fixing bugs and stuff like that, it is. But all this triaging, communicating with the users, understanding what they're struggling with, understanding what they're missing out on, is just such a huge process. That's why we had an entire team dedicated to it within the jQuery project. Now, there's obviously a big part of this as well, of understanding the library, is having very clear documentation, in our case, API documentation, explaining every single method inside jQuery. And we had API docs from the very start. Unfortunately, there is no magic wand to make this happen. At least in my case, I just sat down and wrote all the documentation myself, because I knew it was important and I knew people needed it to understand what was going on and how to use it. Now, one thing I think was interesting is that when jQuery was released in January 2006 with documentation, two of the other major libraries, Dojo and Prototype, didn't have official documentation. And in fact, they didn't have official docs until at least 2007. And so I find this gap to be sort of interesting, because these are cases where they were missing out. By not having docs, their users were probably struggling or maybe going away. And this is a case where jQuery could have benefited. And just as an example here, I'm sure as you're all familiar, this is what our API documentation looks like. Another thing that we did was early on is we actually provided a way to export the documentation in a programmatic way. It was a giant XML file. And a lot of people went through and turned that XML file into alternate views for the documentation. So you could go through and you could look at it on your phone, or you could look at it, you could download it and have it offline, all these different ways. So people, you could look at it in whatever mean you wanted to. And of course, the next step beyond documentation or basic API docs is that you really want to start expanding and start providing more material, tutorials, or even books, although that maybe is a bit optimistic. And at least in our case, on jQuery, we now have an amazing whole Learn jQuery Center with tons and tons of tutorials in many different languages. And I'm sure, as you've all seen that by now, but this is the sort of thing that took many, many years for us to develop and sort of come to this ultimate conclusion. Now, one thing I think is important here is that these are just some of the things that we've worked on. But the thing is that there are lots of other secondary concerns. I have secondary in quotes here because frequently things like accessibility, internationalization, responsive design, performance, and bandwidth, all these things are considered less important to good, beautiful code. And which is a bit frustrating because these things can be incredibly important to your application, and all these things require empathizing with your user. For example, if you don't understand that some of your users may be you're trying to use your site on maybe an old Android phone that only has intermittent 3G bandwidth, then if you can't empathize with them in that experience, maybe you're just writing giant, megabyte size, many megabyte size web pages that are very slow to download and take a long time to process and will just crash in their phones. And so this is the thing where by understanding your users and that you can just produce a much, much better product. And all these things matter. One little thing as an anecdote I want to throw in here at the end is that one of the things I realized early on is that whenever users are using a library, and especially in the world of open source libraries that jQuery is in, at any point the user, let's say they finish a project, which they ship something, and it's like, okay, it's time to start a new project. Every single time someone starts a new project, that's an opportunity for them to say, okay, well, do we like what we're currently using, in this case jQuery, or do we want to use something new? And this is, I think, an important and critical time in the life cycle of a user. Because the thing is that if they're like, well, we weren't really happy with the library, there were a lot of bugs, and we really didn't get the help that we needed, maybe they'll go someplace else. And so one of the hypotheses that I have, and I have really no way of proving it, is that, so this is actually like a Google Trends snapshot from 2008. And what you see here is that it goes up, and there's that big divot there, and that's around the holiday season in December. All right, so everyone goes home, spends time with families, and I had a theory that people generally wrapped up projects in December and shipped them and got them out and got them ready, and they would start new projects in January. I have no way of proving this. But so one of the things that I did as a result is that we always did a new release of jQuery immediately in January, right when people came back. So they would come back to work, and on January 14th or so, we'd release a new version of jQuery and be like, here it is. And then because that's the point at which they're like, okay, we're starting a new project, what should we pick? And we're like, maybe you should pick this brand new, awesome, really fast version of jQuery because it's just what you want and what you need. And then but the one reason why I think that's true is that every single year we did this, you can see the path going up. And then suddenly January happens, and now we're going up even faster and even more into the new year. So again, I have no way of proving it, but it's my gut hunch. And again, it comes from trying to understand their users, trying to understand how they're using the library at a fundamental level. So just to summarize here, is that you really need to be willing and capable of helping your users at every single step of the way. You need to be able to step in and find people who are straggling, people who are having bugs and issues, and get in there and be willing to help them and be able to help them grow and flourish. So ultimately, you need to understand them, work with them, empathize with them. I feel like that's just so important to the growth and success of a library. So excellent. Thank you.